Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ross Wallace. I am a principal at Santis Health, and I'm an advisor to the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. It is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to what we know will be a fascinating, important, and timely discussion on Canada's biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy, looking ahead and reflecting on the past 12 months. This event is being hosted by the Resilient Healthcare Coalition, and I look forward to sharing more about the coalition, its members, its mission, and its mandate over the course of the next 90 minutes or so. Let me quickly walk through the agenda, and then I'm going to move to a land acknowledgement. So after some introductory remarks by one of the co-chairs of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition, Dr. Jason Field from Life Sciences Ontario, we will have introductions of our three fantastic panelists and discussants from ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, who will offer a short presentation formally on the biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy, some of the highlights of the last 12 months, some perspectives, priorities, and areas of focus going forward. And then we'll have an opportunity for some discussants to share some initial primary remarks and initial and immediate conclusions on that presentation. Then we'll open it up to a moderated conversation that I'll have the great pleasure of leading, working with all of you to ensure that your voices are heard by our guests and that we can have a real robust and dynamic conversation between now and 5 o'clock. Then we'll talk a little bit about sort of where we hope we go beyond 5 o'clock and how we're interested in continuing this collaboration and this conversation well beyond June the 27th. And so with that, allow me to pivot to a very important point and share this land acknowledgement. Before we proceed, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we are on today. While we meet today on a virtual platform, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility in improving relationships between nations and improving our own understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. Many of us are speaking to you from Toronto, located on the traditional territory of several nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. It is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this nation home. We thank them for sharing these lands with us. Please join me for a moment of reflection to acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and to consider how we can each in our own way move forward in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Thank you all for that. And now it's my great pleasure to pass the microphone to Dr. Jason Field, who will offer formal greetings on behalf of the RHC and situate this event and today in the context of our priorities and our policies. Jason.
Well, thank you, Ross, and welcome everyone. Appreciate you all taking the time out of your afternoon to join us. You know, when Ross first approached me to co-chair the RHC, like many of you on the line, I wear a lot of hats, a lot of different hats, and I'm always hesitant at taking on another one. And but this one was really unique, and it was unique because RHC really brings together a diverse group of stakeholders from industry, research, patient groups, right across the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors. You know, our mission is really to create this more resilient healthcare systems in Canada. And our two primary goals are to do this by first optimizing the use of healthcare data to better inform healthcare decisions. And secondly, to expand and accelerate patient access to innovative health technologies right across the board, you know, to the benefit of health systems and better patient outcomes. So this is really a unique group, and you know, having to work together and find that balance between all of the different agendas, I think has really made this a very exciting group to be part of, and gives us a unique position and viewpoint in the space. You know, during the last couple of years in the pandemic, it certainly has shone a light on some gaps that we've had within our life sciences sector. And I think one of the things that we have learned is that it's a sector that cannot be neglected. It needs some constant you know, care and attention to make sure that that it is competitive and well positioned when we do face these sorts of crisis. You know, about a year ago, with this in mind and the learnings that we had from the pandemic, we hosted an event entitled How a Robust Canadian Life Sciences Strategy Drives Both Health and Wealth. Again, bringing that unique RHC perspective. And, you know, it was very interesting because a month after we held that event, ISED released what is currently the Biomanufacturing and Life Sciences Strategy. So we were really pleased to see that that come to fruition. And since that announcement of the BLSS, we've seen a number of investments to boost Canadian biomanufacturing and pandemic preparedness. But we can't forget that those address an immediate need. But again, we still need to have that long-term vision and strategy in place, you know, as we move forward into the future, to be not only prepared for the next health crisis, but also to position us to tackle the health crisis that we already face and we faced even before the pandemic and may have been exacerbated because of the pandemic, you know, with backlogs of diagnostic and treatments within our healthcare system. So it's very important that we continue to have these dialogues. And I'm really pleased today that the folks from ISED, Darryl, Kasondra, and Rodrigo, have taken the time to join us today, talk about the Biomanufacturing and Life Sciences Strategy, its development, its governance, and where it's headed into the future. So thank you for taking the time, all of you, and thank you to our speakers. And with that, I'll hand it back to you, Ross.
Thanks so much, Jason. Let me just offer sort of a few kind of housekeeping items before we turn to the formal part of the presentation. So first thing, there's a lot of folks on the line, which is absolutely incredible. And so in order to maximize the contributions that as many of you as possible can make during the Q&A period, we're going to try to keep a little bit of a queue. So please sort of flag your interest in speaking using the reactions that Zoom so usefully and helpfully provides. And I'll keep sort of a running array of speakers and list, and we'll work through as many folks as we can with rigor and focus. If you are not speaking, please mute yourselves. All of us have lots going on in every part of our lives, professional, personal, situational. And so the easier it is for the conversation to take place, regardless of what's going on in your backgrounds, would be, I think, wonderful. And I think beyond that, please feel free to use the chat function. Feel free to use it to complement or build or add on the perspectives that people are offering formally in the actual Q&A. Feel free to drop links, endorse or add to the perspectives that folks are offering. And we will make sure that those chat comments are integrated into any follow-up or any summary that is generated after this event. We are also recording it, so it will be available for colleagues, partners, and allies who weren't able to join in real time. And thanks to those who are keeping your cameras on. It's always nice to see people rather than just a whole bunch of black squares. So we appreciate those who are willing to be seen with us. You know, we have but an hour and change together, and obviously the more visible we can be in that way, the better. That's fantastic. And so with that, allow me to take a moment to introduce our three speakers from ISED. Darryl Patterson, the Director General, Life Sciences and Biomanufacturing Branch. Darryl's worked at Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada since 2014. In his current role as DG, he's built a team of over 50 members to lead implementation of this strategy to reimagine and revitalize the biomanufacturing and life sciences sector in Canada. From 2014 to 2017, he was Deputy Chief Negotiator for the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, an accord amongst the federal, provincial, and territorial governments to facilitate better movement of persons, goods, services, and investments within Canada. Before joining the Government of Canada, Darryl practiced litigation at a national law firm in Toronto, primarily in the areas of corporate, commercial, constitutional, and administrative law. He holds a BA from Laurier, a JD from Dalhousie, an LLM from Cambridge, and an MPA from Harvard. Rodrigo Arancibia is ISED's Senior Director of Life Sciences. Rodrigo has been with the department since 2016, contributing to the development and implementation of the government's Innovation and Skills Plan and the Biomanufacturing and Life Sciences Strategy. His work has touched the Innovation Superclusters Initiative, the Strategic Innovation Fund, and the Economic Strategy Tables, all measures designed to promote strong partnerships among entrepreneurs, researchers, and policymakers. Prior to joining ISED, Rodrigo occupied the role of Deputy Director at the Department of Natural Resources, or NRCan, responsible for the development of policies in the minerals and metals sector. Rodrigo holds a Master's of Arts in Economics and has worked in Washington, D.C., conducting economic analysis and research. And Kasondra White, who's the Director of Strategy within ISED's Life Sciences and Biomanufacturing branch. Kasondra is responsible for overseeing the development, coordination, implementation, and monitoring of Canada's biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy. This role follows her active involvement in supporting a number of the government's response efforts to the COVID-19 pandemic, relating to, in particular, establishing domestic capabilities. Prior to her time at ISED, Kasondra worked with the energy sector and the Canadian Forest Service at Natural Resources Canada. She received a Master's of Arts with a focus on resource management and climate change adaptation from the University of BC, where she also conducted participatory research on Indigenous health outcomes. So thank you, Darryl, Rodrigo, and Kasondra. And now it is my great pleasure to pass the mic, Darryl, to you first to begin your formal presentation. And we'll see all of you momentarily.
Thank you, Ross. Thanks to the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. Very pleased to be here today. Appreciate the invite. I think it's as advantageous for you as it will be for us to engage in a good conversation here. I'm joined today, as Ross mentioned, by my colleagues, Rodrigo and Kasondra. Just to provide a bit of an overview of how we'll approach the presentation in terms of structure, we're going to aim to provide you a bit of an update, some context leading up to the strategy, an update on the strategy, and then an overview of sort of where we see it headed from the government perspective. And then, so I'll do that initially, pass it off to Kasondra, who will do a bit of a deeper dive into some of the other pillars. And then we'll open it up because I think the probably the most engaging part of the conversation will be, of the presentation will be the conversation that follows. So we're happy to answer any questions that you have and hear your thoughts. And it's nice, things have started to open up a little bit, and we've been around and been able to engage with some stakeholders face to face. And so it's nice to be here today in a larger group to be able to continue the conversations on the strategy, given that it's so well attended today. So very happy to be here. We can go to the next slide. So as I mentioned, we're going to present a bit of an overview, illustrate the kind of interconnectedness amongst the pillars of the strategy, what we're hoping to achieve, and then move on to the updates on next steps. So we can go to the next slide. So I think that one point we always start with when we talk about the strategy with colleagues and stakeholders is, and it's a very important point to make, is life sciences in Canada is strong, full stop. You know, the talent in Canada, characterized by 40 world-class research hospitals, 19 centers of excellence, 40 incubators, accelerators, 400 plus biopharma companies working on 800 plus products in Canada, either in preclinical or clinical trial phases. So lots of talent, lots of research, lots of skill in the sector upon which to build. So it's no surprise that when the COVID pandemic hit, you know, Canada's talent and strong base, you know, led the way on LNP technology, for example, lipid nanoparticles, or for monoclonal antibodies. So lots of things that were key in Canada to responding to the pandemic. But the second point for that, and I think Dr. Field, you know, touched on it a little bit, is notwithstanding all the advantages at the onset of the pandemic, there were a couple of, you know, areas where Canada, where it really hit home, that there was some gaps in our ecosystem that required attention. Not the least of which was this dearth of large scale, population scale biomanufacturing production capacity to respond to the COVID pandemic in particular. So what large scale capacity we did have was already dedicated to other important vaccines and medicines, and so couldn't pivot easily. Of course, there weren't many places in the world that had the mRNA population scale manufacturing capacity, but their infrastructure was such that they could pivot and respond quickly. And I think that was one area where you know, there is a well-recognized lack of capacity as a result of a 30-year decline in that particular space. So we know there's other areas where gaps exist, of course, some of them related, some of them separate to that require, you know, continued focus and attention moving forward, which is in many ways recognized in the strategy as we see it, in its evergreen approach. And I think what's important to highlight here is, while the pandemic was difficult for everyone, I think there's a lot of commendable work that was done across all levels of government in Canada, industry, coming together, responding, and hopefully it's something we can build on moving forward as this sector gets increased attention and increased level of importance when you think about, health security and national security moving forward. So I'll just pause here to say, of course, in the pandemic as well, we can't lose sight of the fact that Canada's response was superb in many respects, including, the strategies put in place to ensure that Canadians had access to the vaccines to become among the most populated, most vaccinated citizenry in the world. And so a lot of good work was done by colleagues to ensure we had access to vaccines, notwithstanding some of the gaps we had on the domestic front and able to produce them within Canada. So pandemic hits, some of these gaps are recognized. Strategies put in place by our colleagues in the federal government and in the provincial governments to ensure that we had access to vaccines and that those vaccines got into arms. But that wasn't the only thing they did. So the government sprung into action immediately in light of some of the gaps that were identified, making immediate investments based on expert advice in the sector, to the tune of so far $1.8 billion invested in the sector since the onset of the pandemic. And that's in biomanufacturing, vaccine, and therapeutics projects across the country in a diverse range of technology platforms that will provide a good base to continue to build on the sector. So 10 vaccine candidates were supported, 11 therapeutics candidates were supported, CDMOs were supported, and FDI, of course, as well, direct investment from outside of Canada. So with that base, I think there was still a recognized need for a longer term outlook on how we would approach the sector at the federal level, but also how we would work with industry and provincial colleagues and others. And so, early 2021 conversations began about, okay, we've made, in crisis mode, we've made taken a certain number of actions. What does it look like moving forward, and how should the federal government position for the long-term success of the sector and the continued support of it? And so that was the kind of genesis of the biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy, which was announced by the government of Canada in July of 2021. And there's essentially two overarching objectives of the strategy. And Dr. Field also touched on this. One is ensuring, Canada's in a different position moving forward on the domestic front when it comes to being able to produce relevant, effective vaccines and therapeutics and other essential medicines and medical countermeasures when the next crisis hits. And the second is, in doing that, and they're not distinct goals, they're interrelated, is in making these investments and pursuing strategic areas of Canadian strength. We want to reap the health and economic and social and other benefits that come along with having a robust, resilient, diversified, and strong life sciences and biomanufacturing sector and posture in Canada. And so, for the sake of sort of intellectual organization, we've grounded ourselves around 5 pillars. One thing I'll continue to iterate, throughout the conversation is that we want to capitalize on the momentum that was built with the efforts of the last 2 years, but it's a strategy that will continue to evolve. As we continue to produce results, we track improvements, track successes across the strategy, we hope to only continue on the momentum, expand the strategy, adapt the strategy, be agile within the strategy, because what's relevant 2 years ago might not be relevant 5 years from now. So there is a willingness and openness to continue the conversation and ensure that the strategy remains relevant and essential in responding to the sector's needs. So I'll briefly delve into pillar 1, and then I'm going to let Kasondra take over and run through pillars 2, 3, 4, and 5. But when we looked at how the federal government anyway was organized in responding to the pandemic from a sector and innovation perspective, I think what we found was that the countries and the peer countries that were able to respond quickly, that were able to adapt, and that had built up a base upon which to address the pandemic, one common characteristic or frequently seen common characteristic was that they had a central sort of approach, a central guiding mind that was thinking about this sector in a different way and supporting this sector in a holistic way for periods either before the pandemic or at least immediately at the time of the pandemic. And so in Canada at the federal level, we had a lot of success, but it was through a massive amount of coordination and effort by different departments that had different, not the same mandates entirely, that came together in response to work together. That, of course, is complex. It requires a lot of effort and time, and maybe is not the most efficient way to proceed. And so we looked at it and said, okay, absent a kind of central organization that's responsible for this, how do we recreate it in the aggregate, at least as an immediate step? And so what we've done with the governance structure is to ensure that the departments that had the most impact on the response from an innovation and sector development perspective, we're looking at issues, looking at investments, looking at projects, looking at issues affecting the sector from a holistic point of view. So really, our governance structure now that we've established brings together under the stewardship of the Minister of Health and the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, the deputy heads, for example. So there's a deputy head steering committee that has an eye on all of the work and all the administration of the funds under the strategy, which Kasondra will get into momentarily. And so that's the deputy heads of ISED, the deputy head of Health Canada, the deputy head of the Public Health Agency of Canada, of the National Research Council, and of CIHR, as well as the deputy heads of the granting councils. And what this does is it allows us to look at proposals and ideas and issues from a government-wide perspective at the federal level, and how priorities in health impact investments made in innovation and vice versa. So, and that filters down kind of throughout the system within the governance structure. So the ADMs are situated in the same way as our directors general and others. And so the idea is that we're looking at these issues in a very structured way and ensuring that decisions are made taking into account the varied perspectives. And we're hoping that over time, this will allow better outcomes because we'll be able to provide stakeholders and colleagues and others with a central place through which they can raise their concerns and issues and ideas while information sharing becomes more efficient. The other four pillars I'm going to turn over to Kasondra to go through as she'll explain and go into it. The idea is to ensure that we're providing supports across the ecosystem, across the product development timeline and continuum, and ensuring that we kind of at each stage have priorities and investments and resources in place to support companies and others in ensuring a robust sector. So with that, I'll turn it over to Kasondra, who will go a little bit deeper into the other pillars and as well as explain some of the resources that we have that back up the strategy and allow for effective implementation of it through the provision of resources and financial and other to proponents. So over to you, Kasondra.
Thanks, Darryl, and thanks for the nice introduction, Ross, and really happy to be here speaking to everyone today. And so if you wanted to just advance to the next slide, please. Thank you. So Darryl gave a really great introduction and overview to this strategy. And so I'm just going to go a little bit further to talk about some of the specific activities tied to each. And what we've laid out here on this slide is a snapshot of the funding that was provided through budget 2021 for this strategy. And so this included $2.2 billion in total committed to the sector across a number of different areas. And I think importantly, through the 2021 budget and the strategy itself, we saw a recognition that we really needed to take a whole sector ecosystem approach to building out the sector, supporting our pandemic readiness, as well as sector growth objectives. And so, you know, what we see here are a number of different funds tied to research and research infrastructure, including the new Biosciences Research Infrastructure Fund administered by the Canada Foundation for Innovation, as well as the Canadian Biomedical Research Fund, which is being administered by the Tri-Councils. We saw funding for ADMARE, the Stem Cell Network, one of the really significant funds, and one that we're quite preoccupied with at ISED, of course, is the $1 billion target for the sector through the Strategic Innovation Fund, ongoing support for the NRC and the new Biologics Manufacturing Center, as well as a new clinical trials fund through the CIHR. And then we've also included here, although maybe not specifically carved out in the budget in the same way, but still continuing to provide important supports across the sector, the IRAP program through the NRC. And so what we've tried to show here is that we've associated each funding stream with a distinct pillar under the strategy. And so, for example, we see here, we have the $1 billion allocation to the Strategic Innovation Fund, driving pillar 3 about growing the sector. We have funds such as the Canada Biomedical Research Fund and the Biosciences Research Infrastructure Fund, primarily associated with our pillar 2 of the strategy, which is associated with research and talent. But I do want to just spend a second to explain our semicircle diagram here, because I think it makes more sense with a bit of explanation behind it. And what we've tried to do here is map the anticipated impact that we expect various programs will have across the pillars of the strategy. And I think it's important to note that what we're trying to do through our governance, through the way we're setting up our programs, is to take an integrated look and a comprehensive look at what's required across the sector. And so we're trying to align core objectives, decision-making structures, so that the programs will work together and not as isolated or siloed initiatives being driven by different departments or agencies. And so that's really at the heart of what we're trying to achieve here. And so reading from the inside of the circle outward, the expected impact is greatest. So in this way, we see programs like the CBRIF or the BRIF, the Research Infrastructure Funds, are also helping to create a pipeline of ideas and talent that might advance clinical trials, might eventually grow into companies that we're looking to anchor to our ecosystem. And we see that pre-existing programs like IRAP and SIF are having impact across the ecosystem by supporting innovation and ensuring dynamism in the sector. Again, while creating anchors that in turn can help to support the evolution of the next generation of firms and ideas in the sector. So if you want to advance again to the next slide, kind of just another way of maybe saying some of the same thing, but what we've tried to show in this diagram is we've mapped our programs along an innovation continuum, representing a portrayal of the steps and activities needed to take an idea from the laboratory to the marketplace. And so this is a pretty simplified model. We recognize innovation, it's not a linear process and can't necessarily be divided neatly into distinct segments. There are also a range of other programs and policies that support the sector, either directly or indirectly, beyond those depicted here. But what we've done is we have laid out and tried to visualize how the various programs and activities under the biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy, and particularly those that received significant funding support through budget 2021, offer continuity of support for Canadian researchers and entrepreneurs from inception all the way to market distribution. We've also continued to map our programs and projects and initiatives against this kind of a concept to allow for kind of continual monitoring and assessment of any potential gaps where we might want to consider different approaches in the future. And so in that way, and I think an important point to note is that we really do see our strategy as being an evergreen strategy that's continually in evolution. We're making really significant investments in the sector. The context continues to shift and change, as does the way that the strategy needs to be responsive to the needs of the sector. So a lot of our work moving forward, of course, keeps this in mind. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to now spend a bit of time doing a pillar by pillar update of activities and where we're going across each of the pillars of the strategy. And maybe I'll mostly just jump over pillar 1. I think Darryl gave a good overview of governance. Again, just to reiterate that we have had success in establishing our whole of government approach, which has been foundational to the work that we would like to and are continuing to do under the strategy to bring together that health portfolio perspective with the innovation, economic growth, and industrial policy perspective brought by ISED, and as well as other partners who are involved in the delivery of the strategy. So on pillar 2, focused on research and talent, we've made significant progress in the areas of research and research infrastructure. And so we've launched competitions under the Biosciences Research Infrastructure Fund, as well as a joint Canada Biomedical Research Fund and BRIF Research Hubs competition. And so notices of intent were required and were submitted near the end of May. And we're anticipating full applications to the program later in the summer. And so we're really quite excited about what's coming in and about landing on and sharing some of the results of those competitions as soon as they're available, which we're planning for later in the fall in October. We've also successfully announced the $92 million investment in Abmare earlier in the spring to drive company innovation, scale up, and training activities in Canada's life sciences sector. On the talent and skills piece, we recognize that this is a really important aspect that will continue to drive the significant transformation that the sector is experiencing. And so to that end, I think we're doing quite a bit of work still in this area to make sure that we're able to address the gaps that we're hearing of and that we're seeing. And so I think a stat that we often hear and point to is it's a biotalent number that the sector by 2029 is expected to require about 36,000 new employees. And of course, as we continue to invest in the growth of the sector continues to take off, that number could be even higher. And so I think when we have conversations with stakeholders, when we talk about the strategy, the talent and skills piece is, one of the first things that tends to come up. And so we're really very much attuned to this as a priority area to continue to focus our efforts. And so actually, some of you may have participated. We were leading some work out of the department with Deloitte to look at and continue to assess the gaps in the talent and skills space in the sector. And so we're having some preliminary findings from that and understanding some potential gaps with respect to some talent and some infrastructure to support talent and skills development. And so continuing to look at that piece while also leveraging some of the broad-based sector agnostic programming, including MyTax, ESDC programming around the sectoral workplace solutions program. ISED has a new upskilling for industry initiative to try to mobilize and bring together a bit of a more comprehensive approach to supporting the talent and skills needs of this sector in particular. So pillar 3, around growing the sector, again, largely focused around the $1 billion SIF target that we have for the sector, but of course, lots of other activities and pipeline of activities that feed into this space. And so the focus of this pillar has been on federal investments to scale up Canadian biomanufacturing and life sciences companies, as well as attract investments from leading multinational firms. And so, as I think Darryl did a good job highlighting early in the pandemic, we made a number of urgent investments to support Canadian businesses and researchers developing countermeasures against COVID-19, as well as expand domestic biomanufacturing capacity across a range of technology platforms. And so in recent months, we've developed and refined a framework to guide our investments moving forward and provide direction across other activities associated with the strategy. And so within this framework, we've landed on a number of focus areas as we move forward, including our first, focus area that was represented through the activities through the pandemic period around establishing or reestablishing vaccine manufacturing capacity in Canada, as well as advanced therapeutics and central medicines and supply chain inputs have all been areas that we've looked to and have focused on. We also recognize that other areas will be essential to ensuring that we're prepared to respond to future health emergencies. So again, always kind of keeping top of mind those twin objectives of enhancing our preparedness while helping to grow the sector. And so through our future investment plans, we also aim to ensure access to diagnostics to support our public health response, as well as critical medical supplies, innovative health solutions to support our domestic resiliency. And we continue to assess areas where we would want to prioritize domestic capacity. Finally, I think it's important to mention, we recognize that the next pandemic or global health emergency could take a completely different shape from the one we're currently dealing with. And so the solution set might also look different. And for this reason, we've established an approach that recognizes the value in taking bets on the next major health breakthroughs and technologies of the future. And so this remains a core area of focus through our strategy and our investment plans. Pillar 4 of our strategy, we call enabling infrastructure and assets, or thinking about that public capacity or public good that kind of is required to round out the ecosystem. So what are the other gaps that we're seeing that aren't touched through the company building or the research activities? And so so at the core of this, of course, is the ongoing operationalization of the Biologics Manufacturing Center and taking advantage of the assets that are in place at the National Research Council. We're also looking to evaluate other supports that we might want to put in place in Canada to ensure the sector is well coordinated and that opportunities exist to build a critical mass of top talent, research, innovation, industrial capabilities. And so our work on this pillar has been informed by consultations that took place in the winter and early spring of 2021. And again, some of you may have participated in that process. And the purpose of the consultations was to explore ongoing gaps in the Canadian biomanufacturing and life sciences ecosystem, as well as standing national assets that could serve to address the gaps. And we had a really good turnout. I think we had 109 written submissions to the consultations. We conducted 7 industry roundtables, really great insights that inform the strategy itself and then continue to inform our work going forward. And so we heard about a need for flexibility and modularity in the capacity that we bring online, about ensuring sustainability during non-pandemic times. So we don't want to make investments in infrastructure that sits idle, but it's that balance between, of course, relevance and contribution to other health priorities with pivotability to help address some of our health needs. We heard about opportunities and the imperative to explore different ways that we could work together with the sector as the government as well, potentially through public-private partnerships. And we heard again about the criticality of the talent and skills piece. And so we've actually published a What We Heard report. It's available online that provides even more information about what we heard through the consultations, but highly informative to the strategy and to our approach moving forward. And finally, the 5th pillar of our strategy focuses on regulations and clinical trials. And this pillar is really largely being driven out of Health Canada, as well as the Canada Institutes for Health Research, and includes a new clinical trials fund, as well as regulatory modernization work that Health Canada is leading. And so on the clinical trials fund, this is a $250 million fund that was announced through Budget 2021 to increase clinical research capacity. It was launched in May and it includes 3 streams. One being a Canadian Clinical Trials Consortium, 2 being clinical trials training platforms to support the development of highly qualified personnel, and then finally clinical trials projects in priority research areas. On regulatory innovation and modernization, new permanent regulatory provisions are now in effect to help meet critical needs of Canadians, including with respect to drugs in shortage. Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada are also taking steps toward new regulatory pathways for health products and research, as well as a proposal for agile regs for licensing drugs and devices. And so this work includes modernized clinical trial regulations, new pathways for advanced therapeutic products, agile regulations for licensing of drugs and medical devices, making permanent some of the interim provisions introduced during the pandemic, and finally undertaking a review of existing legislation to respond to new biosafety and biosecurity risks. And so I think, again, just happy to be having this conversation today. Our team will be pleased to continue to provide updates and advance the dialogue around progress across these pillars as we continue our work. And so I think just before kind of closing out, just want to take a step back and take stock of where these activities are leading us. So I think kind of in contrast to where we started at the outset of the pandemic, as new and expanded facilities come online over the next several years, we'll reliably be able to produce vaccines and therapeutics across a range of different platforms to meet the demands of Canadians. and to support global vaccination efforts. So we anticipate that we'll move from a situation with virtually zero production capacity for a number of vaccine technologies to the ability to produce hundreds of millions of vaccines per year by later in the decade. And I think, again, just to highlight, within this capacity that's coming online, we've embedded a number of principles like flexibility across vaccine platforms, population scale coverage, pivotability, and so really exciting developments in the sector. And so moving forward, our efforts will focus on further diversifying capabilities across platforms and in critical inputs in the supply chain, supporting the growth of Canadian champions and small and mid-sized companies, and then also attracting world-leading biopharma companies and strengthening clusters across the country. So next slide, please. Next steps. And so over the past couple of years, we've seen the beginnings of a dramatic shift in the biomanufacturing landscape. The launch of the strategy, I think, has set the stage for a whole sector transformation with our focus on governance, research, talent, clinical trials, companies, as well as the regulatory system. And projects are underway to build up capacity across, as I mentioned, vaccine platforms, as well as production processes in areas especially where none existed before. So as we move forward, a number of important next steps, of course, ongoing evaluation of proposals and projects against the programs that are tied to the strategy, and then support for project proponents through project implementation phases, because we do want to make sure that all the investments that we're making and the projects that we're kind of taking bets on, of course, successfully come to fruition and support those as needed. Results for the CBER from BRIF Research Hub competition are upcoming, as I mentioned. And then a few important policy areas that I'll just highlight as well. And that includes ongoing consideration of remaining gaps, including with respect to talent and skills, other infrastructure, other supports for the sector, and ways of ensuring we have the capabilities that we need. And as I mentioned, kind of that ongoing consideration of the strategy and where it needs to evolve to. The last piece I'll mention is that we're also quite occupied with measurement and performance measurement against the strategy. And so we are developing a pretty robust, I would say, performance measurement framework for the strategy. And we've had some good conversations regarding, what it is we need to be measuring. And I think that's all the way up to sort of high level targets of growth targets, output targets for the sector, all the way down and linking those to some of our program outputs. And so that piece is partially under development, partially developed, and continuing to be a work in progress. And that will also help to guide our future activities. And so, so maybe I'll just turn back to either Darryl or Rodrigo if there's anything that you wanted to add, but otherwise we can open it up.
I'm good, nothing to add. Thanks, Kasondra. Rodrigo, anything to add?
No, just very briefly, I think it has been a journey over the past 2 years. I think it's no surprise that Canada was a little bit unprepared to respond in terms of biomanufacturing capacity and cohesiveness to respond to an known type of pandemic. I think there was a priority from the government to resolve this right away and mobilize the expertise and talent within Canada. So, there's no surprise that Canadian science and Canadian technology has been fundamental to the global response to the pandemic. There are key technologies, part of the Pfizer vaccine against COVID-19, and Canadian technology and know-how and science was at the center, at the core of the monoclonal antibody developed. So how do we build in terms of that capacity that we have in Canada was the transformation that we're trying to propel within the strategy right now. It's a first step. It's an evolving step, but it's a flexible one. The initial investment provided to our department, part of the Strategic Innovation Fund, as well as the new governance approach and everything else that has been funded through science, really seeks to ensure that government is acting cohesively. From the research lab, we prioritize the type of research that is needed for pandemic preparedness, but also for the strengthen within the life sciences ecosystem. From the company side, we ensure that we have the type of partnership and we're able to attract investment and support the type of project that would allow us to enhance the ecosystem. And you can see that collaboration across the continuum, even on the regulatory side, that is trying to be more proactive and better equipped to respond to future health emergencies. So it's a great momentum to build together and in partnership the ecosystem moving forward. It has the top attention of the Canadian government, and not only domestically, but also internationally. So thank you so much for letting us be here, and looking forward to your questions.
So Rodrigo, thank you for that, and Kasondra and Darryl. It was a shorter number of slides, but a long and large number of insights and information and perspective. So very appreciative of you guys making the time for that. And I'm sure there are many questions from many folks on the line. I have lots, but I know there's going to be, I'm going to take the folks from the Resilient Healthcare Coalition Steering Committee to get kind of first crack at some of your questions. So I know Jason's got one, unsurprisingly. Angela Babuti from Amgen's next in the queue, and I think John Fears from AstraZeneca. We'll put him up after that, John. So I am very happy to fill any dead air there may be. I would be astonished if there was. There's tons of things that folks I think are going to want to jump all over for that conversation. And why don't we waste little time and go right to Jason for first dibs.
Well, thanks, Ross, and thank you, Rodrigo and Kasondra and Darryl. Fantastic presentation, great work so far on the strategy. My question is really, there's a lot of discussion around growing the sector. Has there been much work done in looking at retention of Canadian companies? One of the things that we've seen, or I've observed, over the last decade, is that we tend to lose a lot of growing Canadian companies, usually south of the border, for two main reasons. One is access to capital, and the other is access to market. And let me talk a little bit about those two. So in the access to capital piece, you've described some direct funding programs, but I think what a lot of these companies require is other sources of capital. So public capital markets, leveraging, pension fund investments. I know a lot of work has been done on the VC side through Vicky, for example. But I was just wondering, so first part of my question is, any consideration into leveraging other aspects of capital formation for companies as a retention strategy, as well as a growth strategy. On the procurement side, obviously that is an interesting one because that is mainly a provincial domain in health. However, a lot of countries utilize set-aside programs. And one of the main restrictions around that is international trade agreements, which are negotiated at the federal level. So again, another potential aspect is thinking about that through the lens of the life sciences strategy at a federal level, as trade agreements are being structured to allow larger parameters for domestic set-aside type programs. And in that context, as the provinces are developing their strategies, how is the biomanufacturing strategy aligning with that? So there's a few different questions in there. Sorry to mix them all up, but I couldn't resist.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for those questions. Let me begin, and then I'll pass it on to Darryl and Kasondra. I think the idea of the strategy is to have a comprehensive view, not only of the forest, but also of the horizon, and begin that journey towards that horizon where we want to be in about 5 or 10 years. And the strategy and the investment that have been instituted and that have been highlighted today speak in terms of some of the steps that are taking place. One of the interesting things about life sciences right now is that it not only has the attention of the government, but also companies know that they have a partner in terms of public science, in terms of public support, and in terms of working together with the federal government. You're absolutely right in terms of the venture capital as an issue, and especially when we compare it to the risk and the amount and the size amount that our counterparts in the US are taking regarding life sciences. We the last budget, I believe, had a small support in terms of Tiki for venture capital in life sciences. And it's not so much the amount that I see an opportunity to work with industry, but it's the fact that it was announced as a vehicle trying to address a more fundamental and bigger problem related to venture capital. I think it's an area of work that we'll be happy to continue to work and refine to make something that is sensible to address this gap in terms of supporting the growth of Canadian companies, innovative Canadian companies. So all that to say that from the venture capital aspect, we're doing some internal assessment and thinking about potential policy areas that we can help advance in the short term. So it is in our part of our homework and due diligence, and happy to talk more about this in future times, because we are doing that type of homework and assessment in terms of what can we do to encourage venture capital and grow Canadian companies, but also bring the capital needed to advance high-risk projects. So we are aware of it, and absolutely, I agree with the sentiments of that question. Regarding procurement, that is Canada, you pointed it right, has these interesting dynamics with the provincial and federal level, where we are willing to support a lot of the high-risk research, support the development of something to bring it to market, to give it market authorization. But at the end of the day, we don't have all the levers in order to maximize the procurement tools that we can do in order to support our Canadian companies that are driving science into the marketplace. And this is part of the attractiveness of the strategy at the moment, because all these issues can now be discussed at the highest level within federal departments, with our deputy ministers, to identify the problematic, to identify the issues, but also identify the opportunity costs that we're not maximizing and we're losing vis-a-vis other countries, but really take on board this opportunity. So these are some issues that our policy agenda is being discussed in order to help address them. And Ottawa won't be able to do it alone, so we'll engage and partner with private sectors and organizations such as this one.
Rodrigo, thanks for taking a crack at the multiple components of Jason's very thoughtful and nested question. So we appreciate that. We have a nice little queue developing, which is tremendous. Maybe I'll just make a few quick points. So if folks can introduce themselves when they ask their questions, that would be great. It's a large group and not everybody knows everybody. Please feel free to use the chat for additional questions, thoughts, perspectives, and certainly, consider that another opportunity to engage with each other and with the folks from ISED. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not give just a tiny little shout out to Mark Lavonin, who has joined us. Mark, it's wonderful to see you. Thank you so much for being here and for the singular leadership you've provided to this sector in so many different ways for such a long time. I will not put you on the spot, but if you want to put your virtual hand up, we will make sure that we work the queue towards you. So lovely to see you, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much for that. Pleasure to be with you.
I think it's worth noting that Mark, as co-chair of the VTF, has been instrumental in providing the expert advice and providing strategic guidance to the government. We actually saw Mark last week, so it's nice to see you virtually as well, Mark.
Maybe I could make one point. I won't.
Please.
I won't necessarily offer any thoughts. Great conversation, but if anybody wants to pose a question or ask me something, I'd be happy to participate. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Mark. Angela.
Yes, well, hello. First of all, I'd like to thank the government folks, Darryl, Rodrigo, and Kasondra for being on the line. I have been watching the presentation with a lot of interest. I think a lot of amazing work has already been concluded, and thank you for sharing that with us. So it's incredible, really, to have this forum. Now, just a quick comment. My name is Angela Babudi. I think, as Ross mentioned, I'm a member of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition, and I work for Amgen Canada as Director of Government Affairs. One of the reasons that we really very much wanted to be part of this coalition was to advance the idea, or to really center our work around the idea that that economic recovery and well-being cannot actually take place without health system resilience, and resilience at an individual level as well. And I think I'm quite pleased to see that the federal government strategy really focuses on those two objectives, being enhancing pandemic preparedness while supporting the sector. So, oftentimes the life sciences sector strategy discussions take place in a silo separate from any discussions around health. What I remarked in your presentation was that there are a number of interdepartmental initiatives and cabinet committees already underway involving the Public Healthcare Agency, Health Canada, and yourselves, ISED. I guess the question really is around how can we as a group, as a coalition first and foremost, but also as a group of health system stakeholders, civil society, patients, Canadians, how can we engage in this effort to advance the strategy, and how can we really support you and bring about the success for the sector and the success for health system resilience that we all so badly want to see?
Sure, maybe I can start. Ross, are you going to jump in there?
No, just acknowledging the question. So over to you, Darryl.
Yeah, I think so. Recognizing that, I'm sure your portfolio of interests span things that fall within the strategy, outside of the strategy. So continue to engage whomever you think is the most appropriate. As it comes to the strategy, though, just an open invitation. Like in many ways, we're kind of the central nervous system of it. We don't have all the answers. We don't have all the levers. We don't have the majority of the levers, but what we have is kind of that oversight and ability to connect all the players. And so you should always feel free to come to us with respect to the strategy for ideas, for issues, for concerns. We're also the industry facing, arm of the government. And so it's our job to know that and to understand the issues. And so if we don't have the answer, we can get it for you and we can make the connection. So I think as a respect to the strategy, you can consider us the open door in terms of bringing your concerns and thoughts and ideas, and we can find the appropriate, venue and stakeholders. It's happened a number of times now. We'll get outreach from organizations that want to meet, and we pull together the folks from the Public Health Agency and Health Canada who've been just phenomenal in terms of their effort to infuse their perspectives and expertise into our thinking when it relates to industrial and innovation objectives. So that's kind of the response in terms of who to come to. There'll be some areas where we're less useful, but we try to be as useful as possible. So,
Louise. Connie, why don't I go to you and we'll come back to Louise.
Sure, thanks so much. My name is Connie Cote and I'm the CEO of the Health Charities Coalition of Canada. And my question is similar to some of the previous questions, but it's no surprise that from a patient's perspective, we're really thrilled to see some of the focus and the marriage really from health and innovation coming together. This is really important to us. In particular, enhancing and modernizing regulatory system and health products and research is extremely important as we look to improving health outcomes for the patients that we work with. One of the questions, though, that I do have for you is, how are we going to be able to carve out a space for that patient voice? And certainly around that table, there's an opportunity to bring together different stakeholders, but patients' voices are often left behind in many circumstances. And one of the reasons why we love this particular format that we have at this table is you'll see around this table, many faces are representative of patient voices. And we really feel as though that patient voice has a very unique perspective to bring in terms of where are the priorities, what can we do to change the system, and how can we actually help improve the system? And so just wondering if there's any thoughts on how we might be able to bring forward that perspective into this new system and how we might be able to support that.
I can take that one, Darryl, if you like. So first of all, thank you so much for the question. I think that's an area in ISED, and especially in our team, that we hope to enhance and ensure gets reflected in terms of our assessment and analysis. any time we have a chance to incorporate what a particular policy, even before the pandemic, our team was leading and trying to put forward the views of different groups, including patients group on a particular policy that may or may not impact, that would impact innovation performance, but also the access to medicines in Canada, especially the vulnerable. So that's always been in our back of our work and assessment and levels of importance. And we also understand very humbly that we can learn a lot from patients group, because as you said, you live it. And I think it was some of your recommendations that you were pushing very early on, even before the pandemic, for the government to start thinking about rolling submissions in order to get things approved onto the market faster. What I can say right now is that we have an opportunity to learn about your priorities, to learn about your perspective, and to let us know what works internationally that we can explore and experiment in Canada. We don't have all the levers. We are the Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, but we will be happy to arrange and have further discussions with patients groups, because that gives us our narrative and our different perspective that end up having an impact on innovation. Because at the end of the day, innovation is important if it touches society and if it improves the quality of life. And again, right now we have this set up a structure where we are talking to other federal departments, and we can elevate the conversation on particular issues related to patients. So we would love to have that conversation in terms of how we can strengthen the angles and the points of view of patients groups. We can engage directly with you if you like, or through this organization. We will be happy to have that dialogue in order to have this strategy flexible and evergreen, because I think it's important.
Thanks for that, Rodrigo and Connie. Thanks for your great question.
Perhaps we can leave that as a follow-up item that we can follow up
Absolutely.
on afterwards. Thanks.
Hi, sorry, I didn't hear you call my name last time. My name's Louise Binder, and I've been doing health policy work for patient groups for over 25 years. A lot of work in the HIV community for about 18 years before I moved into oncology. So I have a couple of comments and questions. You mentioned, thank you very much for mentioning, Rodrigo, the reference to rolling reviews. Just to let you know that 25 years ago, the HIV community requested Health Canada start doing rolling reviews, and 25 years later, they are. And 25 years ago, the HIV community also asked the PMPRB to remove the US from the basket of countries for drug reviews. 25 years ago, they did. Unfortunately, I'm not sure I have another 25 years to work on the next policy problems that we have. So I'd like to see if we could do a little bit of a speed up so I could be here to see the end of this problem, which is that with all due respect to Darryl's kind invitation for us to reach out to you to be invited, I would respectfully suggest that according to the Health Canada and Public Health Agency consultation guidelines, co-creation is the name of the game, and public consultation on an ongoing basis is the name of the game. And so I would like to suggest to you that you actually invite us rather than us having to reach out to you. I don't even know what to reach out to you about, except specifically, except to say that generally, it is very clear to me over the last 25 years that the silos between innovation and health policy have not worked to our advantage overall as a country. And I would say that that's true in the pandemic as well. So could I ask if you would be willing to make a commitment to reach out to us and at least have a first consultation meeting with the patient groups that are interested in joining to see how we might be of assistance to you rather than kind of us guessing when to reach out to you. So that's one question. And the second is to do
Louise.
with Biocan RX.
Sorry,
And
Louise, I'm wondering if we could just keep one at a time just for now. Maybe we'll come back to you depending on the queue, because we just got a lot of folks.
That's fine. That's fine. If you can answer this one, I'll go away a very happy person.
Well, A, don't go away, and B, no one would be surprised if 25 years from now you're still fighting for the things you believe in. But let's leave that for now. Darryl, do you want to take a crack at Louise's first question, and then we'll go to John and Raj?
Sorry, I keep getting dropped. I think it's my internet, so I apologize.
Do you want me to paraphrase for you?
I think it was about commitment to reach out. Is that?
Yeah, and the create an opportunity where folks will come because it will allow them to better understand the actual specificity of where their feedback can be most useful, rather than trying from the outside to figure out what would be easiest and most effective in terms of their ability to support your next steps.
I dropped again. This is not intentional, I promise you. So look, I think, as I mentioned, we don't have all the levers. I can't speak on behalf, like for particular issues related to some of the keen interest of particular stakeholders. We can certainly provide a convening function. We can reach out and proactively build relationships within the areas within our purview. And we're happy to also talk to our colleagues at Health Canada and Public Health Agency about the views on how to improve the processes. And streams and avenues for feedback. So absolutely. I mean, we're happy to meet, but just recognizing that we don't necessarily have all the answers or the levers to affect the change you might be seeking. But I think it's still of value to be able to keep the lines of communication open. We have convening functions in particular areas, but not in others. So just to be clear about that, but happy to try to explore ways where we can reach out within our mandate to proactively engage stakeholders in a more active way.
Thanks for that, Darryl. And Louise, an important question and a build on Connie's. So certainly the Resilient Healthcare Coalition would be very well placed and very comfortable and eager to play any sort of bridge building, convening, and coalescing role that might be useful. So we can revisit that afterwards. John.
Hey everyone, great to see so many folks on the line. John Fears with AstraZeneca Canada. And yeah, my question, I put it in the chat, and I will also put a supplemental question in the chat as well. So if the ISED folks can weigh in that way, but it's really about, trying to understand a bit about current state versus future state. I love the approach and the thinking. It seems like the sort of near-term goals are really focused on maximizing current programs in a more sort of connected, less siloed way, but maximizing current programs and fixing the gaps that COVID exposed in biomanufacturing. What does success look like for ISED in the next few years? Like so let's say we solve that. Where are we going, or where do you think we should be going around new programs, new investments, new environment, collaboration? What does success look like in your mind over the next few years in that regard?
I have some thoughts, but maybe Kasondra and Rodrigo, you want to start us off, or?
Sure. Yeah, maybe I'll jump in, and I think I think you have picked up on, and I probably spoke to it a little bit, that of course we wanted to fill that very significant gap that we immediately saw in the pandemic as a first order priority. And I think we're having a lot of success in getting there in terms of bringing online all kinds of new production capacity, different manufacturing processes, different vaccine and therapeutic technologies. A mix, I think, of supporting CDMOs, of investment attraction, and we're trying to kind of take a portfolio approach to the investments that we're making. We also have a longer term plan, and I think it's important to note that, $2.2 billion sounds like a lot. We don't necessarily expect that it will kind of do everything that we'd like to see, or that we'd like to have happen in the sector. And so, we've identified a number of priority areas are areas for focus that we'd also like to look to, and kind of depending on how far we can stretch the dollars that we have available, we are keeping these in mind. Again, linking back to that kind of health emergency preparedness, sector growth, dual objectives. Those are, things like other medical countermeasures, digital health, AI, other kind of health-based innovations, and then kind of that broader category of general innovation, leading edge technology development in the sector. And so, I think that's part of it, and maybe that's more of a medium term vision. Of course, I think it's important to note that it's the biomanufacturing and life sciences strategy. And so there's that dual piece there. And so, I think there's a lot of potential there and a lot of good momentum right now, and we just need to build on it. I think the other piece is, and the piece that we're trying to think through, is what it looks like moving forward, or what the relationship maybe looks like moving forward between the government, between different actors in the sector, between the investments that we're making, but also kind of other players outside of that piece. And so I think there's a coordination dimension to this as well, and an alignment effort that we're also quite attuned to and quite focused to. And so I think, again, there's a lot of scope to be kind of creative and innovative, and to set the stage for some good cross-pollination and coordination as well. And so I guess, in short, it's a pretty multifaceted approach. And yeah, but maybe I'll turn to Darryl and Rodrigo as well to add to that.
Just I think focusing on the question of what success looks like, I think, and to Rodrigo's point about we don't know what the next health emergency or pandemic will bring, but we know it's most likely coming at some point. And if you look at like on the PPE side, for example, we did a call to action early in the pandemic, and 3,000 companies responded. And there were companies in Canada manufacturing masks and manufacturing gowns and manufacturing ventilators that had no space, they weren't in that space before, a lot of them. But they could pivot, and they had the talent and the expertise and the adaptability to be able to do that. So we want to replicate that in the sphere of medical countermeasures beyond kind of PPE. And so it's creating that environment where we're not thinking about just this pandemic or the immediate threats that we know about, but the next ones. And we won't be able to predict exactly what those are, but we want the right people, the right talent, the right resources in place to be able to act on a dime. So we're not left where we were in this pandemic, where we had to build up the capacity first. And so it's a general answer, but that's the objective moving forward. And I think by attracting innovative companies and keeping innovative companies, and what Dr. Field said in terms of generating an environment that's beyond just public support, sort of ensuring we have the VC community and we have the talent and skills retention kind of approaches to keep it, so that the solution, while we might not know what it is, we have the capacity to do it quickly and do it in Canada for the benefit of not only Canadians, but the world as well. So.
Darryl, thanks for that. I'm going to go to Raj. And Raj, before I do, just an interesting comment, Darryl, where you first started to talk about kind of people responding to a market being created to move into the sort of PPE space who previously weren't in it. I actually wasn't sure if that was going to be a positive or a negative, because I think in some ways you want the people who should be moving into that space with skills, with speed, with proficiency, with acumen to move. You don't want the people who move into that space because they're like, hey, bright, shiny dollars from the feds or the provinces or someplace else, I'll just go there, because now the market's been distorted rather than created. And as a result, you actually have the wrong people giving you what you maybe don't need anymore. And then they've completely dismantled their existing operations. So there's that's a tricky place for you guys to find yourselves, but certainly I understand the power of those incentives and the need to have speed and responsiveness. So thanks for that take.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Just in response, I think it's not necessarily, they had the fundamental base upon which we could act and the infrastructure in place to be able to respond. So I think you want a bit of a combination of both, because I think responding in a crisis mode probably requires volumes and approaches and logistics that aren't necessary, that you can't necessarily kind of prepare for in perpetuity. And so it's having those resources and that expertise to be able to adapt as well. But I absolutely agree. You obviously want to hit the nail on the head as much as you can so that you're responding as quickly and sort of efficiently as possible.
Yeah, no, that's well said. Raj Malik, you might have a perspective on how the medical technology space responds to pandemics and contributes to Canadian system resilience.
I do, Ross, and you guys have set me up pretty nicely. So thank you so much. And the comments from Darryl and from Kasondra, I think they lead right into what I was going to ask. So for the people that don't know me, Raj Malik, I'm VP Federal Affairs for MedTech Canada and also a member of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition. Rodrigo, nice to see you again. So I just wanted to make a comment around the medical technologies piece of it, the strategy that you put together. And I echo Jason's comments. Kudos on this. Congratulations. It's a great strategy when it comes to driving economic growth and better health outcomes and health system resilience. And this point that John put into the chat around an evolving or evergreen approach, very much in favor of that. Because I look at where we are with medical technologies, and Darryl, you just mentioned PPE and the fact that we had all kinds of new players coming into the market when we've already got a whole host of medical technology companies in Canada, where if we feed them properly, you'll have a burgeoning medtech sector. And so that's really my question in terms of next steps and moving forward around an evolving approach. Any thoughts, any considerations given to the investment in or the adoption of innovative medical technologies, and that includes medtech manufacturing capacity as well. And sorry I didn't put my camera on. I'm having some technical difficulties this afternoon.
Sure, yeah, I think Rodrigo or Cass might be best placed to talk about some of the next phases of our priorities.
Just very briefly before Kasondra jumps in, I just want to say that that's exactly it. I think the strategy is ever evolving and seeking prioritize the next wave of funding and support that is needed to fill other gaps in the ecosystem. We know that the priority right now is pandemic preparedness for the next future pandemic. Getting ready from a perspective that it's an unknown type of pathogen that is going to hit us. So we need to be ready for any type of threat that might come to us, and that is why you're seeing that a lot of the investment on vaccine technologies, on biomanufacturing and therapeutics is across technology platforms, and is following the advice of leading experts, to which Mark is one of them. In terms of medical devices, absolutely, there's a wave of interesting technology merging innovation into medical devices, how we're going to deal with artificial intelligence, monitoring, tracking, and providing better healthcare. So we have a lever. We want to see that into fruition coming to market. We want to see companies expand and grow, but we know that there are a lot of challenges out there that we would like to continue to put into the radar of government within our department to build the type of partnership that would allow us to build capabilities and competitive advantage as a nation, as a country. That is in our priority in terms of the work moving ahead. The other thing I just want to touch base is in terms of the I do see some of the comments on the chat, and absolutely we look forward to talking to patient groups from our perspective, because for us what is interesting is that we want to hear, learn about the issues, the problems, the even solutions. So that's from our perspective. And that also applies to medical devices in terms of what is that missed opportunity that we're not tapping into because we don't have that interaction. We can do the best we can. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not, but we can try. And that is our commitment as part of the strategy. Kasondra, I don't know if you want to say anything about the next phase in terms of work for the strategy as well.
I mean, I think you've mostly covered it, Rodrigo. I think I would just highlight, as we lay out our areas of focus against those, again, core kind of health preparedness and sector building objectives, we do recognize, medical devices as a priority area and a focus area in our plans moving forward. And I think, again, I know we've talked a bit about our earliest efforts focused on filling those gaps that we saw with respect to vaccine and therapeutics manufacturing, but it is kind of for sure on the radar as part of the broader picture of what it is that we need to do and what we need to accomplish as we're looking more holistically to ensure that responsiveness. So yeah, just to acknowledge that and happy to continue the conversation about what that looks like as those pieces evolve as well.
Perfect. Thank you.
I think we've probably got time for one more question if there's anyone who has not had a chance to say anything. I will create a tiny little window for a succinct and concise last question before turning to our other co-chair for final closing remarks. Going once. Okay, Eva Villalba. Eva Villalba, who is another co-chair of the Resilient Healthcare Coalition and the executive director of the Quebec Cancer Priority Coalition. Eva.
Thank you. So first, I just wanted to thank our three speakers from ISED, so Kasondra White, Rodrigo Arancibia, and Darryl Patterson. Thank you for taking the time and meeting with us. It's a great first step. It's exactly what Louise was talking about. You know, at least I think that the RHC is a great example of how we can convene multi-stakeholders around the same objective, which is, you know, how can we make our healthcare system more resilient, and how can we actually contribute to resiliency at all levels, like Angela mentioned earlier. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank all of the participants, and especially those who posed very thoughtful and pertinent questions. And I hope that it gave you all the appetite to continue to have these kind of multi-stakeholder conversations, meetings, you know, really to see that even though we have different perspectives, I come from, you know, patient advocacy, we have life sciences represented, biomanufacturing. I think that ultimately we do have a lot of objectives in common, and this kind of platform really allows us to really not just reflect, but, you know, think outside the box, hold each other accountable, you know, and really, John was asking before about like future vision, you know, like, how do we know we're doing a good job? Where are we aiming for? And how do we hold each other accountable? How do we do this in a transparent fashion, but also learning the lessons from the pandemic and knowing that it's probably not, you know, the first in our lifetimes. We're probably going to have to adapt again. And so I hope that you leave today encouraged, motivated, and thirsty for more of these types of consultations. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Eva. And I'll just echo the thanks that you just so thoughtfully offered to Darryl, to Kasondra, and to Rodrigo. It was wonderful to have all of you. The sort of two words that jumped to mind as I listened to this conversation. The first was engagement, and clearly there is great power in doing more of what you guys did today. We appreciate and value your willingness to do that, and we're committed to working with you in any way that is useful to you along those lines. So thank you for listening to those requests and for participating in sessions like this and many others, because we know you're on the circuit a bit. And the second one is balance. There's clearly a lot of pieces you are trying to weave together to make this fit. You are thinking about how you anticipate and mitigate against risks. You're thinking about how you maximize opportunities. You're thinking about the different components of life sciences and how to balance across them. You're thinking about different time horizons and the need to balance across those. There's a lot of work that is ahead of you. And I think your takeaway, I hope, is the critical mass of folks on this screen and on screens like this one that are committed and energized and inspired to work with all of you on the areas where you need the most help and where we can help you answer the questions that are the toughest for you. So we look forward to what happens beyond 5 o'clock. We appreciate your willingness to make yourselves available. And to all of you who joined us, thank you for your participation and your energy and your enthusiasm. We will be around through RHC and many other events of similar fora, and we're excited to bring you with us as we go. There will be, in the last few minutes, an opportunity to complete a survey on your sense of this event. It will be in the chat function, but folks who attended will also get an email from us with another link to the survey tomorrow. So again, you can find us across a variety of platforms. And one of the things we've done before today, actually, that might be of relevance and interest to many folks on the line is a podcast that we did on reinvigorating cancer care about the power and promise of precision medicine, which is, of course, a very critical part of life sciences and also biomanufacturing. So thank you again for all of you, for all of your roles and participation in this session, and we hope to see you all again soon.